Good morning, everybody.
It's not
Morning.
recording.
Is it? It should be. Yep. We, yeah, I started the recording. Sorry about that. We had a little
Sorry about
little
that.
hang up, but
On mine, it didn't show recording in progress. So we'll get
Zoom's
started
always
anyway,
Zoom's always playing jokes on us.
right? As you can tell, we don't stand on formality around here. Good morning and welcome to Writers Chat. We're so glad you're with us today. And Writers Chat is the place where we connect community. And now we've got a new slogan and I've messed it up. Writers Chat,
And
connecting
I'm trying to help and I'm muted. So it's been a great start.
Writers
We're
Chat,
having a good
where,
morning,
where
folks.
where craft connects community. Yeah.
craft connects communities. See, I was
Yeah.
doing it the other way where community connects craft, but pick and choose.
Either or, right?
No, anyway, now that we've totally botched that, we are still so very glad you're here. And we are excited about today's special guest. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who's going to introduce Tracy for you.
I just got a phenomenal idea that we need to have like a writer's chat bloopers reel sometime with all of these fun things to share on
That could
YouTube.
be fun.
It would be
We'll
great.
probably have lots of content.
We would. Anyway, so glad to have all of you with us today on Writers Chat, and very happy to introduce our returning guest. Tracy's been a longtime friend of Writers Chat and a occurring guest in our show. And so I know that we have some people who are probably watching the recording for the first time and maybe aren't familiar with Tracy. So I definitely want to introduce her to you for those who may be visiting us for the first time here live or maybe on the recording. But let me pop that up here. Tracy Crump dispenses hope in her award-winning book, Health, Healing, and Wholeness, Devotions of Hope in the Midst of Illness. And she has contributed 26 stories to Chicken Soup for the Soul, and her writing has appeared in diverse publications, including Women's World, Focus on the Family, Ideals, Upper Room, and Guidepost books. And you can learn more about Tracy at her website, tracycrump.com, and find her books on Amazon. Today, she's going to be talking about a kaleidoscope of nonfiction opportunities for us. And I'm not going to talk too much more about that. I'm going to leave it all to Tracy because she just has a wealth of information to share. We'll let everybody know that if you're entering now live, that I'm going to be sharing some of the handouts that she's brought with us today in the live chat, and we have them on the Writers Chat members group for those who would like to get those for today's session. So thank you so much, Tracy, for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. I'm just going to let you take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. I always enjoy being with y'all. You're a wonderful group. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint, and hopefully we won't have any more bloopers today. All right, I've got a couple of things to do, and I can't find where. Okay, there we go. All right. And I'm not going to be able to see y'all when I hide some of these things. Unfortunately, I have an older version of, well, I can still see you. I don't know. I hope that doesn't mess up the screen for you. But anyway, we are going to talk about a kaleidoscope of opportunities for nonfiction writers. And since we're talking about kaleidoscopes, when you look through one, you may see one thing, but when you turn it, you see something completely different. And that's kind of like publishing because it's constantly changing. But that can be a good thing. It can actually open different avenues of writing for us. And each of us has different experiences that will fit with different publications. We don't all fit the same mold. So, what I'm going to do today is use some of my experiences in publishing just as examples, hopefully to be a starting point for you, so that you might go ahead and publish in some of these places. Now, let's start out by talking about reach. Now, I've said this in many workshops. Most of us have an issue, especially when we start writing, that we're passionate about. It's maybe something like human trafficking, could be autism, mental illness, nutrition, fitness, could just a world of things. And as Christians, we have an even greater message we want to get out. It permeates everything we write, even if it's not the main topic we're writing about. But the trouble is, many people think that they have to write a book to be an official writer, to be a legitimate writer. And that's just not true. I published strictly short pieces for probably 15 or 16 years before I ever published a book. And I want to give you a few statistics on why that may be the best way for you, too. I know I read years ago in a Huffington Post article that in the US, a nonfiction book that was traditionally published by a traditional publisher, usually one of the larger ones, could expect to sell under 3,000 copies. If you went with an indie press or a small press like I did, usually the average is between 1,000 and 1,500 copies, which is about where I sit right now. And if it's self-published, the statistics are even more dismal. You may sell between 250 and 500 copies. Now, y'all may be just selling bukus of books, and that is great. But these are kind of the averages that people see when they start writing. Now, in comparison, the third article I ever published, actually the third article I ever wrote, was published in a magazine that at the time had a circulation of 2.1 million. The devotionals I write in Upper Room reach over 4 million readers in 100 different countries. And even the little pieces I've written in Woman's World, which is a supermarket weekly magazine, they have sales of 1.6 million. So you can see the difference. I'm not discouraging anyone from writing a book, but if you really have a message you want to get out in your nonfiction writing, if you really, really want to reach people, you might consider publishing short pieces. So even with, you probably know if you've been writing for any length of time that back in 2008, things changed dramatically in the publishing world. A lot of publications closed or went online, but I believe there are still a kaleidoscope of opportunities out there for us. We just may have to look a little bit harder. So we're going to talk about 4 different types of publications where you might publish short pieces. And those are magazines, newspapers, devotionals, and anthologies. So let's start out talking about magazines. That's where I started. I started writing magazine articles years ago. And I strongly recommend still today the Christian Writers Market Guide. When I got that first issue, and y'all may probably use that all the time, I hope you do. When I got that first issue, I marked it from front to cover, marked it up. I researched, it was like a one-stop shop. I had everything in one place, and I could go and find magazines that I thought my writing would fit. And then it was just like I say, a starting place. And then I went online and found their guidelines and things there. The market guide, I know Sally Stewart, who put it together for years, said that it's out of date as soon as it comes out, because she said things do change so quickly. So you would need to go from there online and see their website and see what all, their current needs and things like that. But it's still a great place to start and find magazines where you might publish. And what I really love about it is the topical listing at the front. They have set off different topics. So if you're writing about finances or marriage, or you want to do interviews or personal experience stories, they have lists of magazines where those things might fit, what the magazines that might be interested in those particular topics. They even list magazines that are interested in poetry, and it's hard a lot of times to find places that publish poetry. So it's a great resource. Now, when I first sat down to put together this workshop, I did it the first time in this last March for the Mid-South Christian Writers Conference. I looked online, and of course, the 2025 edition of the Christian Writers Market Guide had just come out, and it was still $35. Well, I looked this weekend; it's already gone down to $21. So that's a good deal right there. All right, like Melissa already mentioned, I did send handouts, and you're probably going to call me the queen of handouts because I sent her 5 different ones. But when you get a chance to look at those, I hope that you will make use of them. When I did this workshop in March, we did it, of course, it was an in-person conference, and I had printouts of all the handouts, and I had them all hold them up, and I said, what you're holding is solid gold. It's what I wish I'd had when I first started writing. And so we're going to talk about, like I said, magazine articles right now, or writing for magazines. And on that handout, I've got listed the top 3 Christian magazines that I wrote for back when I first started. Those are Focus on the Family, Lifeway, and Guideposts. And so they have some links for those. And I've listed these 3 in particular because they're more like conglomerates. They have several magazines underneath each of their company. Each magazine, they have a lot of different magazines together, and so you can find sometimes the one that will be the right fit for you. Now, I've listed links there, like I said, and the one at the bottom is one that was put together especially for y'all, or at least updated especially for y'all. When I told them I was doing this workshop, they updated it and allowed me to share this with everyone. And it's the Guidepost link. And they have things coming out constantly where making new publishing opportunities for us. So I hope that you will make use of that. But I want to make the point too that as good as the Christian Writers Market Guide is, as good as getting these links is, there are other publications out there. There are lots and lots of other publications. So look for ones that may not be listed in the market guide. There's one that I found several years ago called an Ideals. Well, I don't know if you even call it a magazine. It comes out twice a year. Don't know if you're familiar with it, but your mom may be, because it started in 1944. And since y'all can maybe still see me, this is one copy of it. This is one of their Christmas copies. And it's a beautiful magazine that I had never even heard of before. But once I learned about it, I started researching it. Woman's World is another one that is, I think I've mentioned already, is a supermarket magazine. They are not Christian, but they often, and I'm surprised kind of, that they have Christian themed articles and interviews sometimes. Now they may be right next to the astrology predictions, but but we're not preaching to the choir, so it's still, I feel like, a good place to publish. And you can look for smaller sections. It doesn't have to be the main articles. Woman's World has something they call Circle of Kindness, where they want little stories about somebody doing something kind for you, or you doing something kind for someone else. And I know that Guideposts has similar sections in their larger magazines. So those are some places that you can go and look for opportunities to publish. Now, just a few tips for magazine writing, and you probably all know these things, but I'm not going to make any assumptions. I do want to say some of these things, and the first one I always say for any publication is find and follow the guidelines to a T. That may seem like, well, duh, yeah, why wouldn't I? But you would be surprised as how many people don't do that. We need to stay within their word limits. Magazines have a certain space set off for each article, and they're not going to make it longer just because we want to write a longer article. So we need to stay within those word limits. And I always recommend, no matter who you're writing for, to read previous issues. That way you can kind of get a feel for the tone and the topics they cover. Do they want things like sidebars? I know I wrote for a Lifeway publication. They always wanted 2 sidebars with each of their articles. So I could put that in my query letter because I knew that's what they wanted. And also photos. Do they want photos? Things like that. And a lot of magazines don't want photos, but if they do, that might be something else you can offer to kind of give your article a little extra polish and push there, that they might go for it. Now, as far as reading previous issues, you can often find those articles online nowadays. But if you have to buy an issue, do that. With the Ideals magazine that I mentioned already, I was really glad that I ordered one from Amazon, because by reading it, I learned that they like really kind of nostalgic stories. And so because of that, then I was able to write that kind of thing, and they were interested. They actually have published 2 of my pieces, and I just found out last week that something I submitted probably 2 years ago, they just decided they're going to put it in their Christmas magazine or Christmas edition this year. So that was kind of fun. So order one if you have to. You can buy a Woman's World at the grocery store. And for those of you who like to write fiction, they do have fiction opportunities in those magazines too. Now, you might also find that some magazines are theme related. And if you look in the market guide and it says that, be sure to go online and see what their theme list is. They'll usually have a list for like each month, what they want stories on that month or articles on that month. So that's another thing you can do to kind of research. And always use proper formatting. People sometimes think, oh, that's not important, but it really is. Melissa's nodding her head. Um, Send it in 12-point Times New Roman. And the reason for the Times New Roman is that it translates well across platforms. So they can take your article and put it directly into their layout program. And it's anything that we can do to make it easier for the editors will make us more desirable, our articles more desirable. 12 points and double space, that makes it easier for the editors to read because they read constantly. So we want to do that for them. And you probably already know you single space after periods. I had to learn that when I first started writing. Use the 1-inch margins all around. Use a header with your contact information on the left, and then on the right, tell them what your word count is and what rights you're offering on that. That just gives them the information just at a glance. So those are all things that you can do to make your article more acceptable to an editor. And then, of course, edit, edit, edit. Anything you write, edit before you before you submit it. You want to make it as good as it can be. So again, you can see the handout for more information on those three particular publishers that I have published with in the past. Okay, now let's move on to newspapers. I wrote for three Christian newspapers over several years that published in my area. Just something I thought I'm going to branch out and try this, and it was a lot of fun. I wrote for one in particular for over a year, and these were not papers. Well, two of them were not actually in my area. Their home base was one of them I know was in Kansas, but they had newspapers in different areas, and because of that, they wanted local people to write about local issues. And so that's where I came in and sent them articles about things in our area. And I never had a contract with these. A lot of times with magazines, you will get a contract. It's not near like a book contract, but it will kind of spell out what they expect. But I never had a contract. I would just pitch an article and they would say yes or no if they wanted it. Because of that, I want to tell you anyway that what you're submitting when you submit something with no contract to spell out the rights that they're buying, then what they are buying are one-time rights. I have a story about that I can tell later, but I don't want to go into that right now. But just know that it's one-time rights that you're selling if you don't have a contract. And if you do decide you want to write for newspapers, you probably need to study up on the AP style. With books, we usually use the Chicago Manual style, and a lot of the magazines do too. But newspapers use AP or Associated Press style. So there are a few differences that you might want to study up on. Now, when I once again sat down to put together this workshop, I asked two people that I knew had written or had done work with newspapers for quite a while, if they would give me just a couple of tips that I could pass on to my attendees. Well, they sent me bukus of information. They just sent me a gold mine, really. The two people were Beth Gooch. She is actually the director now at the Mid-South Christian Writers Conference, and she worked at the Memphis Commercial Appeal, which is a major metropolitan newspaper, for 40 years. And she now works at the Daily Memphian, which is an online newspaper. And then Patsy McCrory has freelanced off and on for years for different newspapers. So they, like I said, sent me lots and lots and lots of information. And so that's why I have two handouts on newspaper writing. One is tips from Patsy and one is tips from Beth. But I'm going to tell you right now some things that are not in the handouts. They kind of gave me some ideas on breaking into newspaper writing, if that is something that you might be interested in doing. And Beth said that newspapers often welcome contributions from freelancers. She said most newspapers all across the country are downsizing their staffs. She said, which is good news for freelancers hoping to get a foot in the door because they need us. And the most important thing she said, though, is to read your local newspaper regularly to get a feel for the kinds of articles they accept. She said, pay attention to what they're writing about and the style of their writing. She said, editors want writers who are invested in their community and care about local journalism. So just like the one that I wrote for, they want local people writing local articles. She said newspapers typically use outside contributors to write about certain topics, and those are a lot of times religion, food, gardening, and fitness. And then I added in sports because a friend of mine, she proposed a column about local sports, and she would cover a lot of. She was a sports fan, and she covered a lot of the high school sports and probably college sports too. And she did that for a long time. And so that was her way of breaking into newspaper writing. And another way is to submit unpaid pieces, such as letters to the editors and editorials. Now, Beth did caution, though. She gave a warning. She said, choose your subject carefully and maintain a balanced and professional tone. We don't want to sound like a kook, someone who's just kind of out there. She said, be sure to maintain a balanced tone. And so those are her tips on writing or breaking into newspaper writing. And then Patsy McCrory, she sent me lots and lots of information. And a lot of it was about how she got started writing. And kind of what I gleaned from that is it's being in the right place at the right time makes a big difference. She told a story about one time covering one event, and she said that they got snowed in. It was not around her home, so she got snowed in someplace, and she stayed at a hotel. It just so happened that the singing group Peter, Paul, and Mary, if you remember them, if you remember Puff the Magic Dragon, they got snowed in too and were staying at the same hotel. So she got to interview them for an article, which was I think was a God thing right there. So a lot of times being in the right place at the right time can make a big difference if you're going into newspaper writing. Now, one thing she recommended was to query editors about a column. If you've got a good idea for a column that you think would make a good addition to the paper, then ask them about it. I had a friend who did that, and she wrote for several years about just local happenings, just little hometown newsy events. She was writing for the DeSoto Times like Patsy does now, which is down here in North Mississippi where I live. And she would often call me and ask me what our homeschool group was doing or had our kids won any awards recently. And it was a very popular column just because people were interested in those things. Now, I say, though, that you probably need to make sure you show a need for the column. The editors are going to want something that appeals to a lot of their readers, a lot of their subscribers. So make sure it's not something that's too tied down, too narrow, that most people won't be interested in it. Patsy also said that you can offer photos or illustrations to go along with the article. Unlike magazines that don't take a lot of photos, the newspapers do. Those editors can't be everywhere at the same time. And so Patsy, for instance, she covers a lot of our writers' events. And so she comes to our writers group meetings and book signings and other book events. And so she's never without her camera. And I know my friend who did the sports column, she was always taking pictures too. So if you do go into newspaper writing, it might help to invest in a good quality camera for those photos that you want to send with your articles. Okay, now let's talk about devotionals. Now, even if you don't plan to go into devotional writing, I really urge you to give it a try. I never thought I would. I never thought I would write that first devotion, and I've written hundreds of them since. And actually, my book is a devotional book. I was I never really planned to write a devotional book, but one time I met with an agent at a conference. I was pitching a couple of fiction book ideas, just kind of playing in my mind. And he said, "Well, that's all well and good." He said, "But really nonfiction writing sells better than fiction writing." And he said, "You've written so many devotions, why don't you try writing a devotional book?" And I thought, okay, and that's how that came about. But you know, the main reason that we write devotions is to share God's word. Now, it may be the only scripture that person reads that day, but a lot of people I've heard kind of complain about devotions. They say they're not very deep. They're not, they're just kind of surface. They're just not deep enough. But you know what? They're really not meant to be. They're not Bible studies. They're really meant to get people thinking about God. And hopefully, if they're reading them first thing in the morning, that will carry on throughout their day. And so that to me is the purpose of a devotion. And our biggest market are these 365-day devotionals. They can be online or in print. A lot of times you might get one of those little quarterly magazines where they've got devotions for every day. They need us as writers. They need 365 devotions a year. So they need lots of writers like you and me. And that, again, is our biggest market and the place that we can find a lot of writing opportunities. So let's talk about tips on devotional writing. One reason I really urge you to try your hand at it is that it disciplines you to write tight. As one editor said, good devotions are easy to read, but hard to write. And when I first started, a friend and I first started Write Life Workshops, which is kind of our business that puts out the newsletter. I told my friend when we started sending the newsletter, I said, I really want these to be short for busy writers to read. I said, everybody's getting, and this was back in 2008. So that was before we were getting inundated quite as much as we are today by stuff in our mailbox and things to read and watch. And so I said, I really want to keep these articles under 400 words. She said, I can't even say hello in under 400 words. But she learned how, and then that's what we've done since. Now, I have actually written devotions that were 125 word devotions for the body of devotion. And that is short, and that is not easy to do. But I really, really think that when we write tight, that our writing is sharper and clearer and better writing. So I really urge you to try writing devotions and see how much you can say in that small space. Now, on your handout, I've listed 13 different devotional markets and the links to those markets. And I kind of divided it into two main types of devotions as far as writers are concerned. And one of them I called open submissions, and that's where the writer chooses the scripture and the topic to write about, and then just submits the devotion basically on spec. Those would be like Upper Room, The Secret Place, ChristianDevotions.us. You choose and you submit one at a time, and they decide yes or no whether they want it. Now, the other type I call assignment, and that's where you send sample devotions. And the editor, if they like them, then they will usually assign you maybe 7 to 10 devotions to write at a time. And those that I wrote for were Quiet Hour and Light from the Word. I wrote for them quite frequently for a while there. So those are kind of two different types. I started out with open submissions, and then I moved on to trying to get assignments. And I really thought I wouldn't like the assignments because they usually will assign you the scripture that you have to use. And I guess being a little bit of a rebel, I just wanted to do my own thing. But I found that I really, really like that better because, that's really where we need to start is God's word when we're writing a devotion. And it made me dig deeper, and I really love doing that. Now, also, I've added in some by invitation. These are some where you really can't just submit them online. Some of these you have to kind of find out through other avenues. One that I have written for regularly for 7 years now is All God's Creatures. It's a Guidepost book that comes out once a year, and they have 365 devotions in that. But I found out about that through a conference, and the editor for that was attending the conference or actually speaking at the conference at that time. And so learned about that opportunity. And the thing is, once you find out about one of these, a lot of times they'll lead to other opportunities. You'll find out about more things, more opportunities where you can submit. So that's kind of nice once you kind of get started in these things. Now, again, read the devotions you're trying to submit to so you can learn more about them. Study what elements they include. If you read devotions at all, you know they're all different. They all have different formats. They may start with just a verse, or they may start with a verse and a scripture passage. May want to end with prayer. They may want to end with um, a call to action, a focus, a prayer focus, or a thought for the day. Some will end with questions at the end. So you need to know what, even if you're submitting for an assignment, you want to write your devotion in their format to appeal to them. So you need to once again study and see how they put together their devotions. And you might want to learn a little bit about the hook, look, book, took method. If you've never heard of that, it's just a kind of and then there are other variations on this, but the hook is basically where you capture the reader's attention, where just like in your book, you know, your first page, your first few pages, magazine article, your first paragraph. Well, this you probably want to catch the reader's attention in the first line because you don't have much space. One editor said you grab the reader early and never let go. And then the book section, I say section, it's not really section, but the book idea is where you tie scripture into your story or your opening. The look is where you widen into the big picture, and basically the practical application to life. And the took is your takeaway. So that's where you give an opportunity for the reader to make a decision, whether it's for salvation or how they would do something differently. It may be a call to action or a challenge to change, something like that. Now, this is not a concrete way of doing. You don't have to do this, this, and this. It's just a way to do it, to keep in mind that you kind of get in all the elements of a good devotion and just kind of keep you on track with your devotion. Keep in mind that you have very little time to impart biblical truth, so you need to make every word count with your devotion. All right, now we're going to move on to anthologies. And for our purposes here, we're talking about collections of short stories from different authors. You know, there are all kinds of anthologies, can be poetry or, you know, one author, one person, one writer. But these are different authors submitting to one collection. Now, I'm going to put a little plug in here for my newsletter because one of the best ways you can find out about some of these is to subscribe to The Right Life. I send call outs for Chicken Soup for the Soul and other anthologies with my newsletter. And you'll see at the bottom of each of the handouts, you can find the subscribe button on my tracycrump.com website or rightlifeworkshops.com website. But we're going to talk about a few of the types of anthologies that I've been sending call outs for. And the handout includes the types of stories, the word count, payment, and some of the other information. But we'll talk about each one a little bit here. And of course, my favorite is Chicken Soup for the Soul. Like Melissa said, I have published 26 stories. Just got word this weekend that they're going to publish the 27th in our Christmas edition. So that was exciting. They publish 101 true inspirational stories in each of their books. And the great thing about Chicken Soup is they're open to submissions from anyone. But the stories must be geared toward an upcoming book. So just because you read a Chicken Soup and you think, oh, I have a great idea for a story, you can't just submit it unless it's geared toward one of their books, their upcoming themes. So right now I have 3 call outs for Chicken Soup. One is for Miracles, Angels, and Messages from Heaven. That's all one book. Another one is Funny Stories. And the third one is for grandmothers, whether it's stories about your grandmother or about being a grandmother. Now that one, the deadline's coming up in about a week. So if you have a story you think would fit with that, You want to get that together pretty soon, unless, of course, they could always extend the deadline, but you can't count on that. So those are the three they've got. But I looked online and found that they are already planning their next Christmas book. They usually do a Christmas book once a year, and they'll usually do a dog and a cat book once a year. And they're doing more and more of these Angels Miracles books. So if you've got any ideas, even though we don't have any call outs for those particular topics yet, go ahead and start thinking about those stories and writing those stories, because you will get some opportunities probably in the future to submit those to one of their books. Now, you may or may not be aware that Chicken Soup for the Soul is not a Christian series, but they do allow Christian references if it's integral to the story. So if you want to, and of course, the titles like the Miracles and Angels books, you're going to expect to see a little bit more of that. But they just don't want you proselytizing. They don't want you to try to push, your faith down many of the readers' throats. But if you want to get something like that in, as long as it's integral to the story, a part of the story, then that's okay. Now, when you submit to Chicken Soup, you submit your entire story, get it done, get it edited, or get it critiqued by your critique group, make it as good as it can be once again, and submit through their online form. That's the only way you can submit to Chicken Soup for the Soul, and that's at their website, chickensoup.com. And you can find these call outs and their guidelines on Chicken Soup, on chickensoup.com, on their website. So that's about Chicken Soup. Now, another group of publications I've been sending call outs for lately are the Guidepost books that they're doing. These I call anthologies because they're asking for true first person accounts from submitters. But on these, you can't find it online. It's not like chickensoup.com. You have to basically get the call out through some means. And unlike Chicken Soup, they are a Christian series. And they say they want all their stories to include some amazing or mysterious element. But like Chicken Soup, they also don't want you pushing your faith down the reader's throat. They want the story to epitomize what God is doing in their life, or what God did in this particular account. And also, unlike Chicken Soup, they don't want your whole story to start with. They want you to submit a 50 to 150 word synopsis with any details the editor needs to know to make a decision. And then if they're interested, they'll ask you for the complete story and give you a deadline for that. So that is all in the call outs that they send out. A couple of other anthology groups or series that I've been sending call outs for that are kind of interesting are one of them is called Short and Sweet series. And I don't have a current call out for them, but these are put out by Susan King. I think she's done 17 or 18 of these already. They're done through Grace Publishing. Her latest one was called Growing Older with Grace and a Little Humor. And these are really interesting because you can only use one syllable words to write your story, with a few exceptions, and that's all outlined in her call outs. But I thought that was a really unique take on writing a story. I had a great idea for one time and just ran out of time, didn't get to get it submitted, but I've known several people who have gotten stories accepted by her. So that's an interesting thing that you might want to try. And she started out accepting both fiction and nonfiction stories, but she said the last few she's only taken nonfiction, and so that she wants true stories like that for that. And then the Moment series was first started by Yvonne Lehman. I don't know if any of y'all knew Yvonne. She passed away a few years ago, but she was very fun person to work with. Now, I always called her a free spirit. I had a lot of trouble ever pinning her down on what exactly she wanted for the stories, what her deadlines were, what her word counts were. But this has actually been taken up now by Terry Kaufus. These were done by Grace Publishing, and Terry Kaufus kind of took up the banner for Yvonne, and she is now doing these, editing these and putting these together. Right now, as far as I know, they're still accepting stories for Divine Moments. Another one's called Questionable Moments, One's called Unexpected Kindness. One's Hopeful Moments. Another Patriotic Moments. And then they usually try to do a Christmas book about once a year or some type of holiday book. They call their submissions personal experience articles, which I guess would be basically like chicken soup stories. And their guidelines are not as strict as like chicken soup or Guidepost. So if you're a beginning writer and want to try doing something like this might be a good place to start. Now, neither the short and sweet nor the moment series are paying markets. But they contribute all their proceeds to Christian organizations. The short and sweet goes to, I think it's Christian Broadcasting Network, and the moment series goes to the Samaritan's Purse. So those are pretty worthy Christian organizations. All right, so those are the 4 areas where you might want to try submitting short pieces. And if you've got, once again, if you've got a particular topic or an issue that you like to write about that you feel passionate about, this may be a way to get the word out about it. And again, these lists are not all inclusive. These are just some places where I've had experience writing. And there are constantly new publications cropping up, providing new opportunities for writers. So I truly believe that there will always be a kaleidoscope of opportunities for nonfiction writers. We may just have to change our view a little bit and look for them. All right, I'm going to stop sharing if I can figure out how to do this. Okay, here it comes. And we can see if anybody has any questions.
Well, I know I had seen one, but then you answered it already. So I'm trying to see if we have other questions that haven't been answered yet. And if anybody does have one, feel free to come on now. You can come on screen with your question and ask directly, or you can pop it in the chat if you don't want to be on recording.
Well, while we're waiting, Melissa, I'll tell that little story about the newspaper writing and submitting what rights. If you've ever learned anything about rights, which I really, really urge you to do before you start submitting, is to understand the rights that you're selling. But when I was writing these newspaper articles, I was also in an online writer's loop. And one of the ladies there, she was kind of in the same boat I was. She never had a contract with the newspaper. And so, but she posted that the editor told her he owned all her articles. And she said, that wasn't my understanding of it. And I thought, well, that wasn't my understanding either. And so I thought I'll just check in with my editor and make sure he knows that the rights revert to me. He said, oh no. He said, I paid for the articles. I own them. Well, I took an unexpected little bold step for me. And I contacted Sally Stewart, who put together the Christian Writers Market Guide for all those years. I had read her, she put out another book about getting published, and I had read in there that if you don't have a contract, or if it's not spelled out in a contract, that what you're selling are one-time rights. And I told her what happened, and she said, no. He said, you can only buy, he's talking about all rights. And she said, the only way that you can sell all rights is if it is in writing, if they put it in writing and you've signed a contract with them. So I went back to that editor and I, just kind of humbly told him what I'd found out. And so he, to his credit, went to an newspaper editor's loop he was on, and they set him straight. They said, no, if you don't have a contract, no, you don't own those articles. So again, that's why it's important for us to know about our rights. Okay, that was a little rabbit trail there.
Oh, good one. Very important for us to hear. It's so easy to get caught in those things. It's good to know. Definitely encourage everybody to know your rights. Look into those things. We did get a few more questions popping up. I don't know if I know, Elaine, you asked in the chat. I don't know if you want to ask out live or if you want us to read that for you.
I was just wondering, Tracy, what are where do you get the best guidelines for, how to use scripture correctly without infringement and how to cite it especially in devotionals.
Okay. Well, of course, the devotional is going to be covered by their copyrights and everything,
Right.
and they will probably have at the beginning of the devotional, the little blurbs that you have to post according to each version. But I go as far as formatting and all. I go by the Christian Writers Market Guide. That's a not market guide. I'm sorry, Christian Manual of Style.
Okay.
There's a separate book that kind of spells out things that are particular to Christian writing. And
Okay.
so the Christian Manual of Style, or maybe Christian Writer's Manual of Style, that's the best place, I think, to go to learn how to format.
Okay.
And there is a particular way. You're right. Of course, in the devotions, a lot of times you're just following their format, and so they may have the scripture just a verse at the top. And so in that case, that's all you do. And then always put the version that you're going with. And that's another thing to research too, when you're writing for some of these devotionals, is what version do they prefer, if they prefer one. Some don't care, but some want specific ones. So that's a good question.
Leslie had a question in the chat. She wanted to know, what is the proper time to ask for the status of your submission or to submit to another place?
That's another good question. Of course, it depends on the publication, but I can tell you for Chicken Soup, don't ask. You can't ask. And they will not send out rejection notices. They receive 5,000 to 7,000 submissions for each book, where they only publish 101 stories. So they just do not have time to send out those rejection notices. What they say, and I'll just tell you for Chicken Soup because I know them the best, that if you have not heard anything within 2 months of the book's release, which you can find online under Coming Soon, then you can pretty much figure that they didn't accept your story. And what they do, just to give you an idea for Chicken Soup, is that they will take all those, once they've finally closed, and a lot of times they will extend those deadlines, but once they finally close them, they will choose the top, usually 150 to 200 stories. And at that point, you get a contract. That still doesn't mean you're in, but you're a lot closer. And if you get a contract and sign that contract, send it back in, then at that point, once they make their decision, they will let you know yes or no. But if you haven't heard within 2 months anything, gotten a contract or heard anything, then you can usually figure it's time to move on. As far as others, it kind of depends. Used to say, like magazines, if you haven't heard anything back in about 6 weeks, it doesn't hurt to kind of prod the editor and just say, just wondered what the status was, on my article I submitted on such and such date and such title. It doesn't hurt to do that. You just don't want to be known as somebody who bugs them a lot, nags them. So for Chicken Soup, you can't, don't check. They don't want you to check. Guideposts, usually you're going to know because they have strict deadlines. You'll hear back from us by here as far as these stories that or these anthologies they're putting together and these stories they're asking for. They have very specific, and they're not long deadlines on those. And so you pretty well will know, yes or no, whether your story has been accepted.
Is there anybody else who'd like to ask their question on recording? Go ahead, Christine.
So when someone buys your devotion, now I know this is general. In general, do they own it and have but can you also, if you're in the middle of putting a devotional book together, can you also use what they've purchased?
That's another good question. It depends once again on the devotional. The upper room, I think, I believe, are first rights. So in that case, then once it's published, that's an important point. Once it comes out, then the rights will revert to you. On these assignments that I did for Light from the Word and the Quiet Hour, the first time I ever did that, I was so excited about getting an assignment. And then he sent me the contract for that, and it said he was purchasing all rights. And I said, "Oh, I've always been told not to sell all rights." I said, "Can we maybe negotiate this?" And I'm sure he kind of laughed. He said, he explained to me that what we're purchasing is the devotion in our particular format. He said, you can still use that story and rewrite it. And that's one thing with magazine articles or other things too. They're not buying your story. They're buying it in the tangible format that you submitted it, okay, that you sent it to them, that they published. So you can use the same story. Now, you can't just take that devotion and publish it in your book. If you've sold all rights, it depends once again where you sold it. But if you sold all rights, you can't just take that, but you can use that story and rewrite it. And I'm actually facing some of that now. We've been contracted to write a book for caregivers, and I have published all of just pretty much all my experiences in either blog posts or uh, chicken soup for the soul stories or devotionals. And so I'm having to take and rewrite all those now for my book. So it is, yeah, and it's hard. And keeping up with where did I publish all these things, that's kind of been a challenge too. So once again, you need to be sure you read those contracts, know what they're asking for, but do know that you own your story. You just may not own it in the particular way you wrote it for that publication.
Lisa,
Mhm.
I have another question.
Go for it.
Tracy, you just said something that I have been wrestling with in my head. What is the best way to keep track of all of the different places you have submitted and or mostly been published? How do you keep track of that? I've got my fingers out many different places and how do I keep track of it? What's the best method?
Well, I'm not the best person to ask about that.
Good.
So, because I am an old-fashioned, put it in a notebook on paper, pen and paper. Probably the best way would be to set up an Excel spreadsheet for it. And I've just never done that, but that would probably be the best way. But yeah, because once you think when you start out, oh gosh, I'll remember every place I ever published because you've only published 5 places. So, but yeah, as you publish more and more, yeah, it can get confusing. So I would say probably a spreadsheet would be your best bet.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, this has been great. Thank you, Tracy. Is there, have I missed anybody else as far as questions, or is there anyone else who would like to pop on and ask a question? I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but we still have a little bit of time if there are any other questions.
I just wanted to make a comment. I just put it in the chat, but Tracy, you're so right about that all rights doesn't mean we lose our story. I have the same story rewritten 3 different ways in 3 different anthologies that was published. And so that really is, they don't own our story, like you said, they just own what they did. And as writers, it's so easy because I believe is it 35% of the story and the title has to change and then it's considered new?
Yeah. I have read everywhere from 20% to 65, 75%. So I don't think there's any set amount. I know Cecil Murphy one time said it has to have a different takeaway. Well, I didn't find that to be true because I like you, I published magazine articles about a certain experience, and I published in like 2 major and major magazines. And I was so unsure of myself. The second editor, and this was focused on the family, I said, "Can you read this first article and make sure the articles?" I don't recommend doing that, but she was so sweet to read through that first article, and she said, "Yeah," she said, "This is you have a different tone, a different focus." But it was the same takeaway basically. But yes, yeah, so there's no set standard, unfortunately, for how much different it has to be, but it needs to read like a different article or a different story.
This has been absolutely wonderful and very educational. Great job as always, Tracy. We're always so glad when you're with us.
Oh, thank you. I always enjoy being with y'all.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great getting lots of comments in the chat, how much everyone's enjoyed it. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people coming back too. And just want to reiterate too that if you're watching this replay and you're a member of Writers Chat, you can access the handouts that Tracy sent there at our Writers Chat members group. They're just a gold mine of great information. You definitely don't want to pass that up. And we thank you so much, Tracy, for sharing those. That's awesome. I'm looking forward to pouring through it a little bit more later.
Good.
Brandy, do you want to share about our next upcoming guest for next week?
Sure. We have Larry Leach, who will be with us next week, and he will be discussing ghostwriting, which is a topic we have not done in a very long time, if at all. So Larry has extensive experience with ghostwriting, so it will be sure to be a great meeting. So if you're interested in ghostwriting, want to learn more about it, make sure you come.
And that'll be next Tuesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, or, as Johnny always says, pick your time around the globe. We meet every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And, great, great content that we love to share with you. And anytime you miss one of our live events, you can always go to our Writers Chat YouTube channel to catch the replays there. We have over 300 replays now, considering the combination of our new YouTube channel and past efforts with our friends at Serious Writer. So we really urge you to go check that out. And I think that covers just about everything. So thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you are here. And if you're joining us live, we encourage you to stick around for the after party, and we'll catch you next Tuesday. Bye, everyone.